Hey, everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads to get to those books that have made the best impact, provided the best value for them in their life, leadership, work, or business, all these different areas that intersect. I want to know which one has contributed the most to that work that they do. And in this series, I cover three categories of books. The first category where they're sharing a book with me I haven't read. A second category where we're both covering a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or one we read in our past lives. The third category is when I have the author and or publisher on the series to talk about the book that they want to share with their mass audience. And in this particular episode, my guest today is Christina Dufour. And Christina, a founder with Native American heritage, has a background in finance and brings over a decade of experience in business development to her mission of specializing well-being in the workplace. With a degree in business management and organization, Christina integrates well-being and performance practices into corporate settings, collaborating with esteemed organizations and executives. Christina developed an expertise in well-being with 13 plus years of studying and teaching meditative modalities and supports individuals at all levels to overcome their unique challenges, foster inner balance, find confidence, and more effectively manage stress. She has studied with many expert teachers and a Buddhist monk and is certified in multiple other introspective and expressive modalities. She leverages her unique blend of wellness and business expertise to craft customized programs that provide results-based, tailored solutions for industry-specific stressors. Now, I met Christina in 2020 through the Create What's Needed online forum discussion series put on by Fathom. It was a community that came together right after the pandemic started. It's crazy to think that this is over 4 years ago. And what's even more special about having Christina on this episode 100 of this series, is that she was my very first guest in episode 2. I was episode 1 with the book that I wanted to cover, but she came on to discuss the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and I'm grateful to her for taking a chance on me in that new series that I was putting out at the time. And I found it only proper and appropriate to have her here with me for episode 100, this small yet sizable benchmark in the series history. So, Christina, thank you for joining me again.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, it's been a while since we've spoken on here. So I read the bio, your background, education, the work that you're doing, but what does that look like in the day to day? Can you give a little more about the work that you do with your clients?
Certainly. I work with executives in various industries. Mm, some of the main work we do can be nervous system regulation or performance-based skills in presentation. So basically learning how to find your authentic voice and being more confident speaking about your company or in front of a crowd. I also work with leadership to design training programs that are specific to specializing well-being. So a good example of that is a course I made for nurses, which has gone through a study at a university and shown statistically relevant results for reducing stress. And it's just giving tools to manage stress and promote wellness that are very specific and relatable to the people who are taking it.
Can you speak a little to the pandemic, the experience of the pandemic, what it did for your work? I mean, did you see a spike in a need for the work that you're doing and helping people? Do you see people getting a better grasp on their stress?
Uh, to your first point, yes, I definitely saw a spike in the need for the work, and more requests than ever from my corporate partners and new people asking for more of these resources. And through the journey of the pandemic, actually during the pandemic is when I made that course for nurses, and I was facilitating also different wellness or mindfulness programs within other organizations. And I had been noticing over the time, but the pandemic really brought to light more of the need for stress reduction to be very specific. So even though, meditation and tools for mindfulness can certainly support any individual with their well-being, um, well, our triggers, the things that we're facing on the job, are very specific to that job, to that industry, and even some of our own personal things. So the more specific I was making, the programs, the better results I was getting, the more connection people were having to the material. And I was starting to see a need as well for wellness and tools for spirituality to be delivered in a much more grounded way. So that was part of what I wanted to bring forward, and part of how some of my work evolved, as opposed to just offering meditation and mindfulness and um, you know trainings and all of this. I wanted to make it very, very, very specific to industries. And I was also doing a lot more work through this time. The pandemic stimulated a lot more work for me in theater. And that's something I've been studying for a long time too. So I really enjoy the journey of introspection and studying introspection through meditations and mindfulness and all of this. And theater is the study of expression and the opposite end of things, all of your emotionality. And so the deeper I was getting into that, the more I was learning that was actually informing the introspective side and shifting and changing how I wanted to bring things to people to help them connect better with not only their well-being, but the tools that can get them there, and have tools other than meditation to help them do that, but also have more tools to help them connect better with their external world in the ways that they express. So those were some things that occurred through the pandemic.
So what does that look like when you realize that the work that you're doing with expression and dancing, that you can apply that to the introspective work with your clients? What is that when you realized that you wanted to do that, what was the thought process in that? How did that come to be?
Well, it was actually, even though I have a lot of background in dancing, and that has really informed my connection to the body and the need for that connection in our well-being practices, whether they're meditation or otherwise. The expression I'm speaking to here comes more from theater, because we use our body as an instrument,
Mm.
um, and we're essentially practicing how to get into different states of consciousness. And if we do it really well, it's a consciousness, a state that we find inside ourselves and let flow through us very authentically. Um, so, that said, there are a number of practices to kind of cleanse your instrument. Because if I go to play a character and I have my own emotionality, my own struggles in my head and in my body, then that actually kind of blocks my capacity to connect with a consciousness of a character and let it flow through me uninhibited. So I started weaving some of those sort of cleansing, I guess you could call them, or purging exercises in. And I was using them a lot just to, not only clear my instrument for a character, but I really was discovering or noticing how helpful they were to just figuring out what I was feeling or getting in touch with what I needed. And so I was like, oh, this could really be helpful. I mean, instead of somebody having to, turn their attention inside the inner world and try to decipher all these sensations and emotions and the abstract, right? They can use these specific tools to make it very tangible. So I started putting those into some of the practices, and they're expressive in nature, not that you express in connection with somebody, it's something you do with yourself. But it's expression. You can journal, you say things aloud, and so those are very helpful.
Yeah, and it's interesting hearing you talk about it now. That plays into later when we get into the book. I see like stark parallels between the book, its message, and the work that you're doing. Especially, I didn't know, maybe you weren't doing it at the time. Maybe you were when we spoke back in 2021. When did you start doing that kind of bringing the expression piece into the introspection work?
It was right around that time that I
Okay.
started working with a particular teacher and getting deeper into, working with your instrument, so to speak.
Yeah, there's just parallels between that and the book just because I see the book like so many other great books about going inward to then go outward to find the internal values, the internal power to then express it and put it out there into the world. So we'll keep that in mind. Now, Christina, to understand how you got here, can you give me a little bit on your background? What was it, whether starting into your career, was it education? Did you go into the workforce, family? What was it that started your path into your career? And what did that path look like up until now?
Uh, well, I started in finance and working in banking, and I wanted to be a leader. I started very young. I was 17 when I started in banking, and I became a manager when I was 21.
How did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. I had a dream.
I'm
Truly.
not doubting it, but how did that happen so
Um,
young?
I think it was honestly a mixture of my will and my my intention, my focus. I just kept on. Luckily, I made good relationships. I had good mentors. And so as I was, navigating the journey of the career, I just kept finding opportunities to move up, and I wanted that position before I got my college degree.
So
Um,
right out of high school into that field?
I was in high school working at the bank. Uh, Which is it's funny when I look back on it now and I see how old my nieces are, and I think, "Geez, I was a child. How did I do that?" But, I had a really mature way about me, and I knew what I wanted, and I was very focused, and, I just went for it, and, I was in that role for quite a while, and I started kind of feeling like maybe this isn't what I want. I was young, and, there were a series of events that propelled me to make new moves, and particularly a loss. I lost my father, and suddenly, and so that just shifted my life view. And I started training in yoga at that time, which I didn't intend to teach. I wanted to stay in business, and then all of a sudden, I end up in dance, and it's like, again, this odd situation where I have no dance experience, but they're going to hire me for my business experience to train in the region. And, you know, it was a phenomenal experience, but really challenging because I didn't have a background in that. And although I was passionate about it, uh, it wasn't easy to navigate for a number of reasons without getting too deep into it. And then after so many years of that, I was realizing, this isn't actually what I want to do with my life. And I had developed myself in all these mindfulness, meditative, yogic modalities. I had taken a number of certifications over all these years by then. And I was like, I want to bring that into business. And that's how I started. I started bringing mindfulness, and it was kind of, a big word at the time, mindfulness in organizations. And I was probably one of the first companies that ever started offering it, and I was I was lucky. I got really great clients, and I was doing really great work, and then I just evolved with the wellness industry over this time and made it into what it is today, from just simply offering workshops and trainings that I developed and one-on-one personal support. It has evolved more and more, and I think what we're doing now in the space is really cool because, um, instead of just offering people an opportunity to access meditations or tools that could lead to their well-being, which often leads to a lot of uncertainty and not making any choices, or not knowing what to do with that or how to apply it on the job. We're really making it very specific for them. And I just think, what would it be like if everyone had these, they go into a job out of college, right? And they're able to access a course that, you know, gives them awareness of the things that are going to stress them out in this particular job, in this particular environment and industry. And then they have tools right there. And now leadership has tools to talk about, and there's an open door to, talking about wellness and taking responsibility for that, which he talks about in the book, that self responsibility. And, you know, it's really of our own choice to make a difference in that area for ourselves. But for employers to be able to equip people with very specific tools that, you know, are proven to be successful is a great thing. And it feels like a blessing that I get to do this work.
Yeah, it shows commitment on their part, that they respect their employees, that they can provide tools like that, that they're not just gonna, not that they do this, but, run them through the mill, squeeze every last ounce of energy out of them, and then send them on their way home and say, "Hey, by the way, these programs are over here that we can refer you to. Good luck with those." But it seems like they're really intentional about structuring it for accessibility to their people. So that's amazing.
Mhm.
Christina, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing now? Whoever you were as a kid, does it reconcile? Does it make sense or not? I'm always curious about who someone was as a kid and how their work today, the values they hold today, the work that they do today, how it ties into that. How does that play out for you?
I suppose so. It's very interesting because when I look back, I can recall many times where I was using my imagination. And, I had this big whiteboard and like a little schoolroom I had set up downstairs, and I would teach my dolls and like imaginary people and stuff like that. And so I did that a lot. And I remember pretending that I had my own business and taking phone calls on this phone that wasn't even plugged in, like as a very, very young child. I can recall things like that. So sometimes when I look back, I think, isn't it funny that I was playing imagination, teaching and running a business and this sort of thing, and that's what I do today. Even though it's not specifically what I was doing then, or what I was teaching, or the business I was
Yeah.
running. I do think it's fascinating that it's come to that. And I also do remember spending a lot of time kind of connecting with myself, or alone, or in nature. And so it's interesting because I didn't have any exposure to any of the wellness or mindfulness meditative tools at that time. But I guess I did show signs as a very young child that I might have an interest in that, or spirituality.
Yeah, it's amazing to have that. That's why I always ask the question about your early career. How did you get into it? Was it education? Was it family influences back then? And it's amazing that most of that just seems to have been innate in you, of like the business, taking the phone calls with the phone that's not plugged in, getting out in nature, having that connectedness, that connection that early. That's incredible.
Yeah. And one thing that does stand out to me is I experienced a lot of loss from a very early age. 10 was the first age my grandmother passed away, and we were very close. And then from there, I just lost people that were very, very close to me. Um, and I think that exposure to death and dying played a big role in my mind opening to these sorts of spiritual ideals as well, and wanting to live with well-being and with happiness, and wanting to make the most of the life I have, and make it long lasting, and wanting to give more love and health to others by keeping myself well. I think a lot of that, and the openness to the spirituality, really came from those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants that kind of loss, but it's amazing that out of those losses, you can provide this gift to others and a gift to find in yourself what you can do just to kind of honor all those losses, the people that you lost, taking lessons from those losses and moving on with your life, growing and developing yourself and others. So that's beautiful. Christina, what does
Yeah,
leadership mean? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, and managing, the grief that comes from that, uh, is something I think a lot of people struggle with, and I know I did. It's hard to lose the people that are closest to you, your parents, your grandparents, and I mean, it's hard enough to lose anybody, but it can be life-changing, you know, and finding yourself in all of that is interesting.
And it makes you grow up a little quicker. So when you mention how you were mature at that age, at that young age, getting that job, I mean, I can imagine that played a role in it. All that loss is kind of, I don't know, with all those losses, you don't get all that time with those people, all that slow time where you can enjoy the time with them, your grandmother, your father, whoever else you might have lost. So when you lose all those people, it's like it pushes you further into life a little quicker than you would have anticipated.
Mhm, for sure.
And Christina, what does leadership mean to you?
Um, I think it means, being an example of what's possible. And I guess that would be unique for anybody. I myself enjoy being an example of what's possible in the realm of well-being and, you know, being a good friend to myself and being able to bring that to others. Um, being an example of what's possible in forging your own path in life, starting something from nothing and building it into something. The courage, resilience, persistence that all of that takes. It's, living kind of outside the lines, um, and doing right by myself and others really matters to me. It makes me feel good, right? So, being an example of that is my way of expressing leadership.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, so why don't we jump into the book? If you could, why don't you introduce the book and then just kind of give us an overview of the book itself?
Sure. So we're talking about the fifth agreement, um, and it starts similarly to the four agreements. The four agreements had started, um, with everybody being in their own dream, and here it talks about the movie theater, uh, where if you go into a movie theater and you are viewing the movie of life from your perception, um, you see it your way. But if you go into mom's movie theater or John's movie theater or somebody else's movie theater, you notice that everybody else in this movie and everything has its own different way of presenting. It's not like your movie. So it was an interesting spin on everybody living in their own dream, and it set the foundation for him to then review the four agreements again. And then he got into the fifth agreement and learning to listen but be skeptical, why we do that, the different points of view or the ways that we kind of interact. What did he call it? The attentions: first,
Yeah.
second, and third attention. And then he got into, essentially being respectful of where anyone person's attention is, and how we can live all of these five agreements for finding inner peace, and how we can essentially change the world by making the choice to do that for ourselves.
Yeah. So there's so many things that come up when I read this book. First of all, I pictured it like the Matrix because he says, you're in a dream, everybody is domesticated. And it's amazing how we can all have this kind of idea that he covers in these books, but obviously it's his perception, so it's his language. But I really envision kind of just like the Matrix where everybody's kind of plugged in. You're getting the information that society is giving you and you're moving along. Um, and I forget if it was in the first book as well, but there was a phrase that kept popping up. This is your virtual reality. What you see is your reality. It's your perception. That life can be, if you let it, full of lies, and that we have to get to our authentic self. Um, so why don't we just go through the agreements just to kind of give a breakdown, just a little more meat to each one. So the first one is be impeccable with your word. So what does that mean to you, Christina?
Um, being impeccable with your word. I mean, he talks about it in terms of using your word in the direction of love and truth, right? And but reading the fifth agreement, this this particular agreement landed on me in a different way. In fact, I'm still digesting and processing how I think about this because I feel like it goes beyond. It's really about connecting with the intent behind everything you're saying. Really connecting with what are you feeling inside? What's the energy in you right now? Because that's what you're transmitting. And functioning from a place where our intention is aligned with truth and love, which leads me to a place of there's just so much less to say at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and in reading through it, I think there is I forget the exact wording, but it's similar to what you just said, where it's kind of like you just be.
Mhm.
Once you let go of all of that which you're not supposed to be, all that you've been programmed into, all that you've taken on, you just be. Which at the end, I was kind of not surprised, but just curious. For me, it's kind of like, and then what? But then, once you be your authentic self, you can share that with other people. That kind of plays back to what you had said before about the inner work that you do to impact the outer world. So you work on yourself, you get to that truth, and you don't play into the bullshit of the world. You don't play into the script of the world. Um, it's funny. What also comes back for me for this is just when I was a kid, I was an introvert or more introverted than I am now. And, people may have these different ideas of what introverts are. Introverts may be very different in how they operate, how they think. Mine was just sitting back mostly and watching the world interact, watching people say certain things and then act as they were saying or act differently from what they were saying. Watching people complain that things weren't working out, but then you roll back the tape to how they said they wanted to be and that they didn't play out the way that they wanted to be or they didn't act the way that they wanted to be. So when it comes to impeccable with your word and being intentional, it's amazing how yeah, it is that intention. It is being truthful. It is to me part of it is, saying what you mean to say and getting that truth out there. And I don't think too many people do that. I think we still get wrapped up in that script of the everyday world going along with what society expects of us, and that's what gets us in trouble.
Mhm. Yeah. You know what I was when you were mentioning the first place of just being, I had an image in my mind of or a memory of being with somebody who I felt very or feel very comfortable with and how often we're together and we're just there with each other and we're not saying anything and the peace that exists in that no matter what we're doing, you know, uh, because sometimes it occurs when we're active together. Uh, and that's part of what was coming to me around that being, is that place exists inside us. Just because we might be experiencing a connection with that very easily with a particular person, which I'm sure we all have maybe one person or more that we can experience that with, doesn't mean we can't access that whenever we want it. And so I wonder if maybe that's part of it too, is finding that place where we can always be in touch with that place inside of ourselves and allow ourselves that space, even if we're simultaneously experiencing something inside of ourselves that doesn't agree and wants to impart something different. I think he says this in the book too, how these things all exist in us at the same time. So it was just kind of coming up in me that, we have experiences where we do experience that being.
Yeah. And I think for most people, we're in this society, we're always on the go, we're always so busy that sometimes that can feel, because it's not a familiar force, it's not a familiar energy or feeling. I think when we're not used to feeling like that we're at peace, whether it's being completely silent or in the flow of whatever is going on, whatever is taking place in the environment. It's the exception, it's not the rule. So when we feel like we're really being ourselves, it's almost like people get uncomfortable because they haven't been given permission to be like that. They've never been told about what that can be. um, Certain books may put it a certain way, not quite like this book. This puts it in its own vernacular, its own wording, but it's I could see how for some people it could be uncomfortable because it's just not, the majority of our world is 99% go, go, go. This is what peace looks like. This is what happiness looks like. So to find your own, and live there and just exist there, it's not a practice that's commonly shared or espoused about.
Agreed.
And each of these kind of builds into the next. And Christina, if you want to, we haven't done this in a while. I haven't broken down a book with somebody. So if something comes up, whether it's for the first one and we got to go back, just let me know. If I'm reading something and something comes up, that's fine as well. Just jump right in. Um, so again,
Thank
all of these things are things that kind of get in our way, things that we allow to get in our way, programming that we've had drilled into us, the domestication. I love that. I love that idea, that visual of, I just picture like a pet, like that wants to be energized and free, right? Wants to run about and just explore the world, or like a child, right? They just want to, I'm comparing them to pets, but they just want to run around. They want to enjoy themselves. They want to laugh. They want to just let wild and free. And we're domesticating them. So we're saying, you can't do that. You have to act this certain way. Their religion becomes your religion. Their philosophies become your philosophies. So the next one is, don't take anything personally. So we went from being impeccable with our word, uh, which is about being intentional, I think being real, being authentic, to don't take anything personally. And again, this is a lot of inner work, this book. It's about programming that we need to deprogram. And this is a big one. This is, don't take anything personally. I think a lot of people stop themselves from moving forward in the world. I think they stop themselves from being who they are because of the reaction that they might get from other people, or their perception of what those reactions might be. Can you dive into this one a little bit, Christina?
uh yeah, the don't take anything personally is an interesting one. And I say that because I've experienced in myself just how often something somebody says, even if not directed, fine tuned at me, could impact the way I feel about myself, for good or for bad.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed in my work, talking with so many people about their emotions and things like that. The same thing. And in studying theater, the whole thing is about taking stuff personally. You don't have a drama. You don't have entertainment unless people are taking things personally. Isn't that interesting? Um, and I'm going to read a little passage from the book. And, the way he writes sometimes I feel is so strong. Like, it's very easy to take what he writes and have some resistance to it because it's just so convicted, right? This is a piece from that portion. Don't take anything personally. Um, at this point, it's clear that the people you love the most don't really know you, and you don't know them either. The only thing you know about them is what you believe about them. You only know the image that you created for them, and that image has nothing to do with the real people. And he goes a little bit further, and then he says, the truth is you have no idea what's going on in anybody's world, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're dreaming. What is even more surprising is that you thought you knew yourself. Then you come to the conclusion that you don't even know yourself because you've been acting for so long that you've mastered pretending to be what you are not. With this awareness, you realize how ridiculous it is to say, my beloved doesn't understand me. Nobody understands me. Of course they don't. You don't even understand yourself. And, as a teacher of meditation and a practitioner more so, the journey of learning meditation was really hard, really hard. And, and, one of the number one things I see in my work, of course, is people who have a really hard time just sitting with themselves. And I think there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. You don't even know yourself. It would be very easy for anybody to immediately disregard that. But how many of us can't even just sit with ourselves? So then how could you say you know yourself if you can't observe what's going on and be with it and this? And I'm not professing that I know myself because I've done a ton of sitting with myself, but that was really truly part of the beginning of knowing myself, was making my body sit nice and still and learning to relax in that place of just being with what's here inside of me. And not and the only way I could be able to do that was to essentially become less judgmental or non-judgmental, be
Hmm.
non-attached, be, patient, like not strive for anything. That was all of those attitudes had to take hold for me to be able to sit uh, without pain in a way.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of knowing. So not taking anything personally, I think makes a lot of sense. And here he's saying, don't even take what's going on inside of you personally. And I've watched myself become more less judgmental with others, with the world around me, as I've sat with myself and had to practice essentially being less judgmental. So I do think it starts within.
Yeah, don't take anything personally. Yeah. This was a I think there are certain books that you read and they're kind of like a turning point in your life. They're not like a 180-degree turning point. You're still heading in the right direction, but you have a little better understanding of what your tools are, who you are, what you want, going for that. And this was definitely one of those books. And I love how it overall the book across the four agreements, that theme is there, that it does start with you. And you had mentioned that before we started diving into the book, that it starts with you, that it is this inner work. I like that it kind of cleans the slate off, not perfectly, like you said. I mean, we've by the time I read this book, I was already 40, maybe something around that, maybe late 30s. So I mean, that's all those years of programming. So when it's like And I love the way you just spoke about his writing, where it's like it speaks it with conviction, but it speaks it with a tone that it's like somebody, a friend of yours that's sitting next to you, walking you through these ideas, walking you through this concern for you, wanting you to get it right, wanting you to. And he says, listen, the way that you're reading this now, it's my perception, it's my stories, but it's like the fifth agreement you spoke about, listen but be skeptical. So he wants you to see what you can take from them. Um but I love the way he writes, because he's walking you through those emotions. It's deprogramming yourself, and that's not easy. If it's 30 years, 30 plus years, 40 plus years, 45 years of programming that I've gone through, it's going to take some time to kind of unwind those things. But I think it was going back to the turning point. I think this was one of those books where I read where it's like you started looking at the world differently. You started looking at the way people looked at you, the way that you look at yourself. You start realizing, okay, this taking things personally, or this person may be thinking a certain way about me. Um, you start thinking that uh, those are perceptions. Those are just stories that we tell ourselves. Obviously, this isn't going to be for every relationship, because there are going to be instances where somebody tells you exactly what they're thinking, right? And even then, it's kind of like, what's going on with them? Like, they could have told me that in a different way. But even don't take things personally. I don't even look at it when somebody directly tells you what's going on. It's those ideas we put in our head of, this person may have looked at me differently, or what was that tone all about? They went this different way instead of coming to me, whether for business, as a friendship. What did I do? Um, so it's amazing that it stops those stories, or wants you to stop telling yourself those stories. And I forget if this was the section that spoke about, don't take things personally, almost because it was selfish of you to do so, thinking that it's all about you.
Mhm.
Admittedly,
Yes.
I read the first book, and then the second book, I checked in with you last week. You're like, yeah, it's the book I want to do, and then I'm okay. I got to get the fifth agreement, and the book goes into the four first again, and then gives you the fifth agreement. So I jumped over to the fifth agreement, but I think this is the one that spoke about. Listen, it's not. He's not being a dick about it, but he's saying it's not all about you. Like, if you think
Mm,
everything is about you and you're taking it personally, it's a bit selfish of you to think that it's all about you. And that plays into that mindset of, you don't know what other people are going through, and you can't assume that you do. That anything you see in the day, whether it's in their behavior, in their environment, or the way you're perceiving it towards you, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
mhm. Yeah. And isn't it amazing how all of this happens on its own? It's not like any one of us are sitting there going, let me take this personally. And I'm going to add this judgment and create this story. And if I take this, we're not
Yeah, no,
doing
it's like
that. Like,
that. It's like that.
the brain just does it. It's amazing. It's amazing. And that's what I meant by observing, and it doesn't take meditation. You can observe in any moment. And I think that's part of what he's inspiring, is the capacity to notice, oh, this is taking, and look how often I do that, and look how much that makes me feel something, that makes me want to do something or say something, or do I need any of that?
Yeah, it's funny. Even with this one, I think in the past, but there may have been times where I was working on something, trying to do something, a collaboration, friendship, whatever. I'm talking about the first 35 years of life, whatever. And if something didn't work out with someone, I would believe that it was something that I was doing wrong. So
Mhm.
therefore, I would kind of mute that point of myself, or that area of myself, whatever it was, whether it was friendship, a school project, or a business project, whatever it may be. But then when you get to this point where you're like, okay, don't take anything personally. Okay, we're assuming you're impeccable with your word, the first agreement. You're being, for lack of a better word, worthy of a relationship, worthy of putting your things out there and sharing with people. It's amazing when you start freeing yourself up from this. Don't take it personally. When you start doing that, you don't jump into those stories right away. Like you said, it's not even like you analyze it and break it down. It's just there. from so many years of programming. When you don't take it personally, it's amazing how if something doesn't work out with somebody in whatever area, work, business, friendship, whatever it might be, when you're not taking it personally, you can use that energy to continue building what you're trying to do and find other connections. Find value in it first. It's not that you need the connections to justify it, but in the everyday world, I mean, it's a matter of relationships to enjoy life and get the best out of yourself as well. So it's amazing how when you don't take it personally, it frees you up to continue building, creating, seeking things in other areas instead of kind of depleting your energy and bringing you down a peg because you are reading into a perception of your own.
Hmm. Yeah, and the Fifth Agreement, this particular book took not taking things personally a little further for me as well, because previous to reading this, I was always really focused on, looking at not taking things personally as uh, whatever anybody says or does is not because of me, it's because of them, this sort of thing. And this has expanded my awareness to, you know, notice that taking something personally happens even with an experience in life, even with, it's really just uh, when my inner world has a reaction that is heightened in its emotion, heightened in its judgment, heightened in its attachment or need, that's me taking it personally, and he got into this later in the book. But that whole idea around, okay, these are tools that are set up for inner peace, and that everything is perfect. Everything that's happening in the
Mm.
world is what it is. So, and I really like that. I would even take the perfect off of it, because that's easy to, get into story about it and negotiate around. But I think there is a lot of just basic fair truth, and well, this just is what it is. The sun is shining right now outside, or it's not. There are clouds covering. Uh, this just happened, or this just happened, or that person did this, or whatever. Things happen in our businesses, in our life, in our relationships, in the world around us, and our body and mind are sensitive. They're affectable, really affectable. And I actually think that the practices, the introspective and expressive practices, like meditations, as well as theatrical practices, are practices that start to get us in contact with our affect and just how much we're affected. And I love them for that, because without them, we're often affected without awareness, or we are affected and we just disregard that we're affected. I think that's very fair to say. And so, not taking things personally, I think, is like becoming aware of how we're, the affect that's occurred inside of us, how we're affected, and what's actually happening there, and taking
Mm.
good care of that, as opposed to, you know, needing to make some huge change in this or that person, or move that, and I don't want to disregard the need for action. Sometimes, obviously, we do need to take corrective action in the external world. But I think that this particular agreement is helping us start to see just how much we tried to take action in the external world. And much of the time, we could actually be working with what's going on in here,
Mm.
and the reaction that we're having from having been affected by something, and how that correcting that, or working with that, I shouldn't say correcting, honoring that feeling, accepting, processing, actually creates change in the external world. I've seen that in my life. I've seen that in people I've worked with, where you work with what's going on in here, and you literally radiate something different. You connect in different ways. You say things in a different way. And thus you just get a different uh, experience of your external environment. The external environment actually shifts and changes to, some function differently with you. Is that
Yeah.
landing? How is that landing?
No, 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 that makes sense because again, it's like what I said before about when something would happen, a kind of trigger, if you will, it would change the way that I was expressing myself. Again, whether it was business, school, relationship, whatever the situation, if I took things personally, it would shut down all of me, 50% of me, 25%, not of me, of that area that was being affected. And it puts a stop in its tracks. And I think this is the same area where he would talk about all the things that we hold on to, um, even from the past, thinking about something that happened 10 years ago. And it reminded me of the book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, where
Mm,
that essentially, I don't know if you've read it, Christina.
no.
It's a heavy read. It's very philosophical, but it's one of those books where you kind of have to. This is very. It's got a nice cadence to it. That other book was just. I don't even know. Like you'd have to read things a couple times to really grasp them. But the short of it was, there's wisdom in insecurity because you're not trying to keep things perfect. Which this book kind of it speaks to perfection as well, and how I don't know what the right word is, but how that can hold you back, this idea of perfection. In any case, the wisdom of insecurity, um, that if you think that you can control everything, that the past has to be perfect, the future has to be perfect, there's no insecurity there. You have to control it. That's driving you nuts. That there's wisdom instead of insecurity in saying, I can't control those things. It's going to come, it's happened, but you have to live in the present, that you can't live in the past. You can't live in the future. You have to be in the present. So that plays into this as well in terms of he speaks to how much we still hold on to and take personally things that have happened so long ago in the past when we don't have control of them anymore. We didn't at the moment that they happened, and we can't change them now. So it's kind of, I love that idea of, if something, and you just kind of spoke to it, if it's happening, it's happening. There's nothing that we can do. And again, you said, realistically, there are actions we can take. We're kind of suspending reality in this, speaking to an ideal world. I know that would happen a lot different than it would look in our ideal world. There are certain things that we have to do, but we can work in this kind of direction to get to that point where obviously we're impeccable with our word, with our intention. We're not taking things too personally or anything personally. You want to jump into the next one?
Yeah, that third agreement, which is don't make assumptions. Yeah, that's a hard one. Why? Because the brain just does that. So again, it's about the capacity to observe, like, that space to be able to notice that was an assumption and be honest with yourself. Like, I don't really know, but I just made that judgment. I just said this thing about that person or about this situation, and that's my opinion. It's not necessarily the truth. Or, something's occurring. The example I recall him using in the book had more to do with my child didn't come home on time and I haven't heard from them, and now I'm worrying, and I created all this suffering worrying for hours. And essentially, I think what he's saying without saying it is, scientifically speaking, I had all these thoughts that created a bunch of overload of stress chemistry, and now I'm feeling very stressed from all the cortisol and adrenaline, and now that's going to take 24 to 48 hours to digest, and I'm going to need tools to downregulate. um, I think that's essentially what he's saying, from having made the choice to attach to a thought that popped up about a possibility of what could actually be occurring, and that attachment either leading to hanging on to the worry until reality presents that there was no need for that, or hanging on to, I'm right. this is the way, and really trying to push that your own truth or opinion onto somebody else. I think that occurs a lot in the assumption section. But the thing that stands out to me as a through line to them all is this capacity for awareness, to just the ability to like notice how it's not even that you're doing it. It's your brain is doing it naturally because of all that programming you were speaking to earlier. This is a natural process. So you need to have to be able to slow down and have made the choice to say, I'm going to pay attention for my assumptions. And then, eventually, if you practice it enough, I think you have to get to a place naturally where you become a really good friend to yourself, meaning you're willing to be wholly and completely honest and really accept what's there because it's not you. This isn't me. These assumptions I'm making aren't me. It's my brain and how my brain is processing this experience. And then, the less we do that, I think the less we create resistance between ourselves and others, between ourselves and our experience of any given moment. And less resistance feels good. Feels like ease.
Mm,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah, do not make assumptions. I've always been an overthinker. I've always had anxiety. I think most of us have had fear. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It's incredible how, if you think about all the moments that you were scared in your life, there are some that were legitimate, right? Mostly like the physical ones, any accidents or when you felt like you were in physical danger. Those ones, okay, I get. But the other ones where you're scared of something, it's amazing how, say, when I was scared of public speaking, you're getting worked up in yourself and your body. You're making that assumption, like that feeling that things are going to go wrong. Meanwhile, they haven't occurred yet. There's no sign at all that they're going to go wrong. That's a very loose example, but it's
Great
amazing.
example.
But it's amazing how much the fear of something is what does you in more than when the thing actually happens. Whether you're speaking in front of a crowd, presenting to your bosses, you may have prepared as much as possible for the speaking, for the presentation, for the workshop, whatever it is. And that's just one area of life or business that kind of stands out. And it's just that assumption something's going to go wrong, something's not going to work out, or this person doesn't like it, or it's just one of those things where the idea is what does us in and eats us up more than what actually happens. And like I said, if it's physical, if there's physical danger, okay, fear, I get. But it's amazing how much we play mind games with ourselves. And again, there's that programming again from school, like you have to get the grade. If not, you don't move on with your class, or else, you're not going to get into college, or you're not going to do this. So we're programmed with that assumption that it has to be perfection. Something has to be perfection. It has to work out beautifully. So we live with this fear and we make assumptions. Okay, this is coming for me. Okay, this isn't going to work out. Um, there's just so many examples you can use, but I think for me as an overthinker, I've always made assumptions. And I can speak to this when I stopped doing this, and I'm a work in progress. It's not 100% assumption free, but again, it allows for freedom to introduce more of who you are, your authentic self, into the situation. uh, Situations where, for instance, if I'm meeting new parents at the school, if I'm meeting new people at work, if I'm meeting new people through networking, assumptions that I would have made in the past kind of held down me bringing forward my authentic self. So now when I don't make those assumptions, now I can step out more freely. Now it allows for more energy, my energy to come out. And it's a perpetual cycle. Once you don't make those assumptions and you allow more energy of yourself to come out, people see that. Not everybody's going to be on board, but people see that and you feel better. So you put out more energy, and it's just this perpetual, valuable cycle where you're not stopping yourself before you've even gotten started.
Mm. Yeah. I love the way you framed that. And I think it speaks as well to some of the things he was saying later on in this particular book around um, being your authentic self and bringing your presence to things. And I think more all of these four agreements, as we're talking about, it's landing even in new ways and with even more clarity for me. It's like even just these first three assumptions you can see just simply with the example alone of going and presenting. It's like when I work with executives on, their voice and presenting with confidence. The through line is we're going to help you present authentically. So I'm not going to sit here and teach you a bunch of presentation skills, which I have. This is how you should use your hands. This is how you should use your voice. Why? Because then you're going to become a robot to try to produce what you think I would like you to do, right? Or what you think the person you're speaking to would like you to do. And that's not what people connect with. They connect with real. Somebody's real. Authenticity is real. It's like that when you're sitting next to that person and you don't have to say anything and you're just there. That's real. You can feel that. He talks about it in the book later on, like if you're looking at a rose blooming, or you're out in the woods and the birds are chirping, or like something that's coming to me now is sitting on the beach watching ocean waves roll in. So you don't need words for that. It's an experience. It's a felt sense, and all of that is presence. All of that is this being. So
It's truth. It's truth.
yeah, yeah,
He brings up that
real.
word, like it's truth. Like there's stories that we tell ourselves, the perception, everything. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. Be impeccable with your word, which means don't create stories. It plays into don't be part of the gossip that's out there, the stories that are out there. So when you talked about the ocean, watching the waves come in, that which is my jam. Like I love the ocean. That's truth. And I love how here's another comparison to animals. I love how he talks about, animals go through their life and they need to do what they need to do, but they're not sitting there, making assumptions. They're not taking things personally. They're doing what they need to do to survive. So I'm going to assume that these deer are going to run away when I try to attack them, kind of thing. But
Mhm.
they're not making assumptions like, does this deer not like me? Like, what do I do with that? How do I so I like that comparison where it just, we're much different than creatures, wild creatures, but they make their way through life. They're not taking things personally. They're doing what they need to do. They're not making assumptions. They're just kind of in survival mode, enjoying, I mean, I guess being an animal. But it's that it's incredible that we're such complex creatures, but we really don't need that much.
Mhm.
Like we need security, we need food, we need shelter, but in this world of technology, it's overdoing it. Um, and I think I've mentioned that on this series before, where social media has been around maybe in earnest, maybe 15 years. Um, and we've been around in different variations, hundreds of thousands of years, they've said, right? The majority of that time, it was about surviving. It was about shelter. Like that was it. If you made it through the day, you ate food, you had shelter, you were safe from being hunted, that was it. Hundreds of thousands of years like that. And then we get to this point where now we're in everybody's houses. Like I see you where you are. I get news from around the world. Like technology puts so much in front of us. And that's just like the last 15 years. And I mean, where I'm going with that is just we're just being bombarded with so much,
Yeah.
and we're taking away the simplicity. Again, we don't need that. When it comes down to it, food, shelter, community to stay safe. Essentially, that's all we need. But all this other stuff just overcomplicates everything. And with all of this stuff, everything in here, Everything in my room right now provides one extra layer of complication that I didn't need at all. I love
Yeah.
all my books. I love all this stuff, but this just overcome this light in front of me, a computer in front of me, this monitor over here, all of this stuff. And with all that comes stories like how, affording it. I mean, books are knowledge, so that's a little different. But in any case, all that just to say, there's just a lot that's going on in our lives that overcomplicates beyond what we actually need. So I think this book is saying, and what's interesting is, I think the first book was written in 2011. I don't know the year on the second book, but what's interesting is there is a part where he talks about how overcomplicated life is going to get. And meanwhile, he wrote that in 2011. That was maybe 5, 6 years into, like, social media, which I think is a huge turning point. And he's speaking to, the problems that are going to come up because of this proliferation of social media. And we talk about assumptions, and we can't get away from talking about, how divisive everything is in the country and around the world.
Well, even just to stay on that one example we're playing with, right? Presenting. And okay, this idea that I want to show up authentically. So I want to come and present, and I want to be myself with you or with this audience. But how hard is that when, you know, I turn the corner and go off stage and go on my phone, and within a minute, within 30 seconds, I have 20 different opinions that I've just digested, or that I've just taken in that I have to digest. And I like what I was talking about before about how we are affectable, just like animals are affectable, right? If you treat an animal a particular way, after a while, the animal's going to start to respond to that, right? So the animal might be kind and sweet over and over, and you think it's unconditional love until you beat it to the point where it attacks you back. And I'm saying that as a metaphor to say everything that is alive is affectable, right? You can't pinch a petal on a rose without it bleeding in its own way. So we're affectable and we're affected all the time. And we go on, social media is a great example of just how we can inundate the mind and body. And we lose the simplicity you're speaking to. Nature is so simple. Peace, I think, is simple. Love is these are very simple things. And it gets very complex when we expose our mind. It's one thing to take a book and sit with a book for a period of time and soak up that information and let that specific set of information and perspective and point of view and opinions digest, and then process that and then go to something new, which is what we used to do. Now we go on a social media app, for instance, and within 5 minutes we have 20 books, if not more. And I feel like that's a lot for our mind and body to digest and assimilate, to be quite honest, and that we don't have enough respect for being human and what we're built to do and not do. And he talks about respect in a bit of a different way towards the end of the book, but and how these agreements are meant to help us be better friends to ourselves. And I think part of being a good friend to yourself is the willingness to be honest, brutally honest about how things are affecting you, and not put a band-aid or a judgment over it because society tells you it should be some way, or somebody has told you.
All right.
Your body has the truth.
Tell me more about that.
In what regard?
Just that you have to be more honest. You don't have to sugarcoat. Tell me
Well,
more about that, because that, again, you probably saw parallels of yourself as you were certain parts as you were reading through this. So something you just said just resonated with me. Just go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, in my own experience, I've experienced uh, you know, doubt, strong self-doubt. And in theater, having to express certain emotional qualities that I don't like to go into, I don't express for myself very often. Certain kind of qualities of anger and grief expressed towards another, and expressed towards an audience, and crying in front, like, that's not me. In my normal experience of myself on a regular basis. So, overcoming those challenges, different types of imposter syndrome over the span of my career and lifetime, and one of the things I've noticed is that when I'm working with experiencing myself, there are these layers, and there's a deep layer that is of a knowing quality, and it's a truth, and that deeper layer knows something that these other layers don't. So when I have a judgment against myself, I feel a reaction to that in my body. I feel an emotion about that, but emotion is of a more superficial quality I've experienced in myself than is a inner knowing, or like a
Mhm.
clear knowing, I like to call it, truth. So I really believe that the deepest part of us never lies. And the more we work on getting in touch with that part of ourselves, which I feel you could call your intuition. I think if we were going to name it so that people could really connect with it, it's like your intuition, right? Your gut, when you know. And if you look back, every time you knew and you didn't follow it, you paid the price. That's enough to say that there's a part of you that knows. And so I think that part of you not only knows in relationship to the things outside of you, but I think it knows in relationship to the things inside of you. And so I try to connect with that place. And I hope this is answering your question. It's like, that's the part of us that I think if we can touch that, that's the place I seek to touch whenever I feel like I'm getting pulled into something else. Self-consciousness, judgment, taking something personally, or making assumptions and worrying, or any of that. I always seek to find that deeper place. And if I could just settle into that, I can ride the waves that are kind of happening above. If I hope that's tangible enough.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the way that you bring that up during this part of the conversation on agreement 3, don't make assumptions. Because to me, it's like, don't make the assumption that you can't speak your truth, that you can't speak to your authentic self, that you can't express that, authentic piece of yourself. Um, yeah, because that's huge. I think a lot of people, to me, it's not only don't make an assumption of something that's coming at you or something that you see, but don't make an assumption and compromise you. And I didn't think about it that way until you brought that up. That's kind of why I jumped on that when you mentioned something about um, expressing when something's not right for you, or when you don't feel comfortable, or when it goes in against that inner uh, authenticity.
Mm.
I hope I said
Yeah.
that right. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of words going through my mind thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like when your body says no, but you don't follow the no. When there's a no that wants to be said and you're not saying no, or when there's a yes that wants to be said and you're not saying yes. It's like, we know that. We can experience the discord inside of ourselves. And what would happen if we practiced not, when we felt the discords, get into an alignment? So say yes, we want to say no. And, he speaks in the book about these agreements being something that helps lead us toward inner peace, making that choice to do that for ourselves, right? So, something that this leads me to consider is also the piece that he talks about self, about respecting ourselves, respecting others. And I really feel like when we honor our authenticity, when we live authentically, when we allow ourselves to show up and just be ourselves and be relaxed and grounded and
Mhm.
here, and free. And we allow others to do that too, without trying to manipulate that or change that or make it how we think it should be. There's respect, right? Um, and and I really like the idea of starting with myself, respecting myself enough to say no when I want to say no, to say yes when I want to say yes. And I feel like the more I do that for myself, the more I allow that for myself, the more there is space already there. I didn't need to create it. I didn't need to try to figure it out. There's just already space there for you to say no when you want to say no, or yes when you want to say yes. There's already space for me to respect you when I allow respect for myself. That's been my experience.
Mm.
Because that's really hard, right? If we make it really tangible, you're in a marriage, a romantic relationship, and and somebody's behaving in a way that doesn't align with how you want to experience your marriage or your partnership. So you're something in you is saying no, and what do you do
Yeah.
when the person who's your partner is behaving in a certain way? And I just, without getting too far into that, I just think it's, instead of trying to make the person be the partner I think they should be, this has really allowed me to be like, be you. That's the partner I want to be.
Yeah, what
It's just,
resonates with me is, not the marriage, not the partner piece, but just saying what works for you, expressing what works for you, doing what works for you. Um, I've always been told that, I'm opinionated, that I'm good at tough love. I've been told that by my friends. People that have seen me on forums and discussions say they mention the word opinionated, and people have asked me why I'm so candid. And it is, I couldn't put words to it, but this conversation puts words to it. If I'm feeling something, if I want to ask a certain question, I think it's, I hope people aren't put off by it. I think it stands out because maybe most people, they have maybe that voice that just says, now's not the time to say that. Now's not the time to ask that. This is an uncomfortable subject. And I tell people, listen, I don't do it for shock value. I don't do it to stand out. If I see an issue, if I want to ask something, I bring it up because I respect the people that are there. I don't want to, if I see an issue, if I see something that needs to be asked, I don't want to wait until there's an issue down the road. So I respect, it's not just for me, but I do respect other people's times. And I've seen it so often when people see an issue, they want to ask a question, but they don't because it might rock the boat. Not physical, not violence. That's where people should draw the line. But they don't want to rock the boat. They want to go along to get along. And I've never been that type of person, especially not in the last decade, because I see the harm in keeping silent, in keeping the peace. So again, this isn't anything to rock the boat. It doesn't have to be anything controversial. Um, but this really does put a meaning to why I do that. It's because I do respect my time. I do respect the time of others. And it is me stepping out of the story and really kind of trying to get to the truth of what I see. So I appreciate you bringing up that aspect of, if that voice is inside of you, why are you don't have to unleash it, what's going to attack somebody, but why are you suppressing it? Um, and that's, again, plays back to that respect. If you're not, then you're disrespecting yourself.
yeah, well, and the unfortunate thing is, and I've seen this more and more, over the last decade than I've ever seen it, in terms of, the how hard it seems for people to have an opposing view these days and still like each other. And I really don't get that at all. like, I really experience in myself a valuing of other points of view, and the only time it really challenges me is if it's so close to my life that it's affecting my life and it's opposed to my value, right? But other than that, I really value. I guess I get joy out of appreciating. Oh, this is how John is showing up. That's how he is expressing his opinions, or like, and really desiring to know by paying attention and just enjoying and appreciating, uh, and trying not to place as much judgment on, but rather just experience as is, which is hard to do. But I
What
guess I would really just like to see in the world that there is more capacity for that space and freedom for everybody to just express how they want to express, and like it's okay, and we can still get along. Like, why can't we get along in some ways? Because even something like religion, how it, and he talks about that in the book too, right? How
Yeah.
it's meant to be a practice of union and community, and somehow it creates a lot of division. Not only division in communities and between people themselves, but division between ourselves and our own creator, which is quite interesting, and I don't know. Anyway, I think a lot of that has to do with this piece is, we're so built, uh, quite frankly, to be afraid to be ourselves.
All right, let's jump into the next one before I keep you here for too long. Agreement 4, always do your best.
Hmm. I like
This
that
was
one, right?
this this one was an eye-opening one for me because I again, something you may hear all your life, but the way he lays it out, the way he breaks it down, this one, I think this is the one that stands out the most for me because when I read it, I really understood it. That to me, it plays into detachment. That if you prepare your best, if you do your best, there's no more than you can give. If there isn't more than you can give and something doesn't work out, it's like you did the best that you could. So for me, this one really stands out the most because this one gave me the most peace that I just have this healthy level of detachment. I'll put what I can into a speech, a presentation, a workshop, whatever it may be, a podcast. And then once I've done my best and put it out there, it's freeing, it's liberating.
Mhm.
Like I took the joy, this gives me joy talking to you, talking to people on this series, presenting, writing my newsletter. Do your best. And then once it's out there, it's freedom. Like, you track things, make sure people are paying attention. You want to get your message out there, but there's a lot of freedom in doing the best you can, putting it out, and then saying, I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm not going to take anything personally about the reaction. I'm going to be impeccable with my word and the way that I put it out and what I believe and my truths. And then I did my best, you know, on to the next thing.
Mm. Yeah, and it did a similar thing for me, and it also um, allowed me to honor myself and what my best was in a given moment. Meaning that some days I was very aware I'm not at my best right now in terms of the height of what my best could be, and being able to be aware of where I was on the scale of my best and not my best has been really helpful for me, because not only has it allowed me to practice self-acceptance in a moment where I have to go do something that kind of requires an energy that I'm feeling disconnected from at the time, and that practice of acceptance oftentimes would allow me to get maybe to a new place and bring more of the energy I wanted to bring, or the energy I wanted to bring. Um, and it also allowed me at times to make a better choice for myself, a more friendly choice, to be able to say, you know what, my best is today is actually saying no to that. My best today is giving myself some rest, and or noticing moments where I was really pouring myself into a project, and that my mind and body were telling me, we've had enough. We've had enough
Mm.
of staring at the computer. We've had enough of generating for this thing. Stop. And being willing to say, that's all I can give for today. That was my best. And I'm going to go spend some time in nature. I'm going to take a break. And I really believe that practicing those things has allowed me to bring more of the best I've ever had of my best to everything, and allowed me a new level of patience and persistence with projects I was working on that were a struggle for me, or um, the capacity to overcome what seemed to be limitations in myself before, um, that are really not limitations. By using always do your best, not only as a way to do what you were talking about, produce something, have the freedom to let that be your best, but and people will react how they will, but also as a way to relate to myself, um, in the production of things and in life and its experiences.
Yeah, I think there's I've seen visuals of this, graphics of this on LinkedIn where it shows you where it says something like I gave 100% that day, and Monday it was only 50%. Like that's what I had that day. The next day it was only 70%. That was my limit for that day. You gave 100% of what you could on those days. Um, well, yeah, and there is a freedom, especially when you're talking about stress, as you see it today, and burnout. I think people need to, if they come to peace with this, calling it quits, right? A certain day, saying, okay, that's all I have for today, allows you to recharge for the next day, allows you to be free for the next day, allows you to go into nature, do whatever you want to like recharge. But if you're burning out every day, it's going to catch up with you. And again, that this can apply to work, this can apply to relationships. So I think, again, to me, it all comes back to freedom. Did you do your best? Were you impeccable with your word? Did you not take things personally? Did you not make assumptions? And then did you put your craft or your energy, the right energy, into whatever you were doing? You did your best. That's all you can do. And it goes back to that discussion about what happened in the past happened in the past. If you did your best, why are you torturing yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because he was saying in the past, he says this a number of times, something to the effect of, if you make a mistake, you pay for it when you make the mistake. You don't need to make yourself pay for it multiple times over. You don't
I
need
think
to
he's I think
ridicule
he says
yourself, judge
thousands of
yourself.
times over or something like that. Yeah.
And there is a lot of wisdom in that statement, isn't there? Because
I mean,
again, I think that's their process that happens naturally, where we guilt and shame and beat ourselves up when we've lived in a way that's been against how we thought we should be, or
I
how
mean,
we want other people to see us.
I just smirk because there are times where I think about things that happened in the past, things that I've done or have been done to me or whatever. And you think about that moment and that sensation is palpable.
Hmm.
Especially if it's like embarrassment and you just kind of cringe because it takes you right back there. It's amazing that you can feel that sensation now 20, 25, 30 years later because you didn't realize what happened in the past happened in the past. You did the best you could. Now move on. So it's amazing how much we do live in the past. And
And
then
that's if I could just
yeah, yeah.
take what you're saying there and tie it to something we were talking about, like that sensation you're talking about, that sensation is palpable. What a great example that is to practice this stuff, right? Because that's the sensation that you want to be aware of. That's the sensation that you want to observe with space. Like that's the sensation that you are not. right? That's the sensation that's making the assumption, that's using the word unimpeccably, or is taking something personally. It's like the sensation underneath that is what I think he's trying to get us in touch with. And so you could even go back in a memory and think of a time when you were embarrassed, just to reconnect with some of these sensations as a way to create a relationship with that part of yourself, to recognize that's not me.
Hmm.
And I wanted to throw that into what you were
No,
saying.
no,
It
no,
connects.
of course, because I mean, I've talked on here a lot with people. There's been traumas that have come up here. There have been traumas or disruptions from childhood. Um, and that, just to say, that has come up, experiences in childhood, going back and looking at it as objectively as you can now that you have this wisdom, whatever it may be, whatever book I was discussing at the time. Now that you have this wisdom, when you feel that sensation, you can go back and even speak to your inner child, whatever it may be, and explain, like, this is what happened. Like, you weren't impeccable with your word. You took things personally. You made an assumption, whatever it may be. So yeah, that's why I'm fascinated about that question that I ask in terms of who you were as a child. How does this reconcile to who you were then? Because childhood obviously has come up so much in this series. So then getting to the last one, agreement number 5, be skeptical, excuse me, but learn to listen.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for you, Christina?
Oh, first of all, he started with this, with the power of doubt, right? And something I was toying around with in my thoughts recently was, and when I teach meditation, the number one thing I've heard over all these years is my brain just won't stop talking. And that was kind of my complaint to my teacher too. My brain won't stop. Um, and I always say, you need distraction to practice focus. You need it. And it occurred to me maybe just a couple weeks ago, you need doubt to practice faith. And I think it was inspired by, I was watching a movie called The Life of Pi, and it says it somewhere in there. And that's just like doubt or that's just like distraction and focus, doubt and faith. Wow. Yes. That makes a lot of sense. And why that matters so much to me is because I experience doubt as a feeling. And I'm aware when doubt shows up because I feel it, right? And then I start noticing, oh, my mind's having all these nasty, doubtful thoughts. Sometimes I notice the thoughts first, doesn't really matter. But I want to be able to have a relationship with that feeling where whenever it shows up, I can say, oh, hi, doubt. And then I can turn my mental attention to faith. And that's what we practice when we play with distraction and focus. I'm distracted. It doesn't matter where I am, doesn't matter how long, but I just bring my attention back to my point of focus, my breathing. And learn to listen, but be skeptical, I think, is teaching just that, because he's saying, listen, but have enough space to recognize that people are also making enough assumptions. People are also using their word unimpeccably sometimes. People are, taking things personally. People are talking from their own dream, from their own story. They most of the time are saying this because they want something. Like, there's intent under everything. Listen, but have enough space. And
Hmm.
that a conscious effort. Like, it takes a conscious effort to be able to say, I'm going to listen with enough space. And so the power of doubt and doubt connected to faith matters to me, because it helps me in those moments kind of have enough space to pay attention to what feels like faith, what feels like truth, and what feels like something else, and then to trust my instincts on that, to come to my own truth. But man, I have so many markings in this half of the book It's like, I don't, Don Miguel Ruiz, where are we going?
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
how did it land on you?
I like
This book?
that. I like that kind of picture that you set up of like yin and yang, right? Like these energies that play off of each other. Um, as you were talking about um, the components and the different areas, like one that came to me was imposter syndrome. I have the confidence of materials, I have the confidence of what I'm doing, but there's always this imposter syndrome. I told somebody the other day, I think it was Susie Hun in the interview and the conversation with her, where I still feel it every time I'm about to hit record on these conversations. I feel that imposter syndrome. I feel that nervousness, but that's good because it tempers my confidence. It keeps me sharpening my confidence. Whereas if you don't have these outside pressures, the yin and the yang, right? You have a little dot of this one in the other one, and vice versa. Without that other side, you don't know what the limitations are on this side, whether it's confidence, whatever it may be, faith, all the examples you gave. If you're not tempered, you don't know what the limit is to what you're doing. And I don't want to have exponential access to whatever energy. I want to have some limitations so that I can appreciate it and keep pushing through growth. Um, but what you said was perfect in terms of this. I like that there's that balance. You can listen because he's telling you, open up to the world, share who you are with the world. That's why, because if you ideally become what these books want you to be, not everybody is even close to being in that mindset. Even you and I are works in progress when it comes to this.
Sure.
Even if we live these books perfectly, others haven't. So there's going to be a disconnection between what you believe and what others are living, right? Say we're living in our truth, we get to that place, and others are still living in stories. How can you relate to anybody else if you're living and speaking truth and they're living and speaking in stories? There's like no connection. So to me there has to be, okay, you're doing this as much as you can, but not everybody is. So you're not going to be perfect. You're going to have some frustrations. So I think
Mm.
it's about living as much as you can by these principles, by these agreements, but know that other people maybe aren't quite there. Maybe they're not even aware that these books or these ideas, these concepts, these ways of living exist. But I think, and we're going to get in wrapping up soon, we're going to get to how he wants us to change the world. So I think we have to be, he's saying you have to be skeptical of the stories that are out there. You have to be skeptical of what's coming at you, with a healthy dose, not cynical, but skeptical. But you also have to listen. And I think listening is how we can help other people. So even if we go into a relationship and I'm like, this person's not quite living their truth, I don't quite think they're, you can kind of get that sense. Yes, it sounds like an assumption, um, but some people are more forthright with who they are. You can see they're kind of different people around different crowds. So you may go into this situation knowing that this person thinks differently than you do, but you guys are friends or colleagues, whatever it may be. So it's like, okay, go in, listen to who they are, because I think that's a gift. For me, listening is a gift. But obviously,
Mm.
be skeptical. Don't be drawn into those stories. Don't be drawn into that world. So I think, again, for me, it's that yin and yang, that the world's not going to be all this. Not everybody's going to fall or subscribe to this, but put it out there. Listen, bring these tools out there. Try to make the best world that you can, but be careful. Don't get drawn back into that habit of creating stories because others are trying to share their stories with you or draw you into their stories.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where he was talking about that piece about respect, how respect is a boundary. When we listen to somebody, we show them respect. Um, and we feel respected when somebody listens to us, don't we? We feel seen and heard. And he talks about those three attentions. The first attention of the victim, right? Everything is happening to me. Everything's just awful. It's that world where you're really living in the assumptions, the worry, the doubt, the fear, and taking everything personally, and no awareness of your word in the direction of truth or love. And then the second attention of the warrior, where you're moving in and out of hell and heaven and hell in your consciousness all the time, because sometimes you are using the four agreements, right? And sometimes you're not, and sometimes you're listening and sometimes you're not, and you're kind of bouncing. And then that third attention of the master, where you really realize, people are in different levels of attention. People are doing the best they can where they are. I can practice the five agreements, and I can offer, this sort of respect to somebody else and myself by practicing these sorts of things. And in so doing, find more peace within myself, because I'm not only, I think he talks about it like, I'm not only less reactive to the things that are occurring around me, but I'm less reactive to myself. Like, really, how good, he asks at the very end of the book, what kind of a messenger are you? What are you bringing? And he talks about, how much of a friend are you to yourself? How well are you really treating yourself by allowing yourself to be you and share who you are? Um, and and that really stood out to me, man. The what kind of a messenger are you? I'm still sitting with that, because I really believe, and I've spoken to in my own life and work, everything he's saying. uh, but it's not always easy to put into practice. And it's interesting, because one of the things I've kind of come to in my own life that this book was solidifying for me is, most of the time I just don't even need to say anything. If I'm noticing I have a bunch of assumptions, or I have a bunch of judgments or opinions, or I'm taking something personally to the way somebody else is living their life or expressing themselves, the majority of the time, the best thing I can do is use that skeptical capacity to see that as it is, and just listen, which is, don't say anything. And I found
Yeah.
that that's brought me a lot of peace, and it's allowed me to use my word more impeccably. And I wonder if that's what he's getting to, but I'll be doing this for the rest of my life, I think. What about you,
Yeah.
John? How
No,
did it all come, land for you?
that fifth agreement, like, yes, what kind of messenger do you want to be? It's interesting. Admittedly, I just finished reading the fifth agreement a couple days ago. And even then, I saw a shift in my behavior in those days. Um, in reading the fifth agreement, I recapped the first four. Um, and I just realized as I was going through those couple days after that I was trying to do that, be impeccable with my word, not take things personally, not make assumptions. What was the other one? I forgot. Always do your best. My
Always do.
favorite one, and I forgot that one.
I was just,
Always do your best. Be skeptical, but learn to listen. I'm trying to live all of these. And the messenger, I mean, what's interesting for me, and it's come up in these conversations, these episodes, is my anxiety. And quick recap, right? The high points. My parents were immigrants, working multiple jobs. I was the first to go to college. I saw them struggle, and my biggest struggle today is not having to worry about any of that. Solid foundation of a job, healthy family, beautiful house, beautiful neighborhood. So it's like everything is taken care of. So there's like idle hands or idle mind, right? I think we're just built for struggle. I think we're built for obstacles. I think that's the way it goes back to what I said, millennia of just struggles and fighting. I think, and it affects us differently, but I think some of us are so used to a struggle. We're so used to that's I'm using the words lightly, that's what it needs to be. So the part that I struggle with is when you get to this point and you're peaceful, and I'm work in progress, then what? When you're at peace with yourself, then what?
Mm,
So it seems like, for if you picture the five agreements next to each other in columns, like I'm getting there. Not all of them are 100%, but I'm like 40, 50, 30, 60, depending on which one. So I like that I'm a work in progress, but it's tricky. Like when you get to the point where you live this fully, it's like, I guess, yeah, you are sharing your authentic self. And from that, you're drawing energy, which I do now. Like, my podcast, newsletter, my work, I'm sharing of myself. So that is my positive energy. Um, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for
really.
hours. It's insane.
You
But
know, I will say though, because you were mentioning that struggle, and as a piece of this, something I struggle with um, is is similar in that, but it's also, I think, uh, growing up and living with struggles around me. I think the way a part of myself um, got a sense of control was, getting into a field and work where I could support others, help others, navigate into something better. One of the streamlines through my journey of working towards peace with meditations and introspective practices has been hard because my relationship with it has a lot of judgment. It's dull. I don't like this, or like I'm scared. I'm actually scared to be this content. I'm scared to be this happy. That's been in my journey. Only recently have I had moments of like contentment where I'm like, I like this. I like this. And that's been weird. And it's funny to me that it's weird. So when I hear you saying what you're saying, we're built for struggle, right? We have that in us. Like, and he's talking about defragmenting all that. As I've worked on that, I know it's so interesting that that's been part of the barrier, is just the judgment around what contentment feels like. And like, it's not okay to be at peace. That's a reaction that comes up inside. And as an aside to that, also, you know, feeling like we always need to share our opinion or give our advice or give directive so that somebody else can lead their best lives, right? I think I did that for a while in my life, and I'm discovering more peace by um, not having to do that. If you want my opinion, you'll ask for it. And I want you to live your life the way you want, like really truly allowing people, like moving so far extreme away from codependency, which I kind of
mm,
believe it is really, I'm going to take care of me because that's the best thing I can do for you. And I'm I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to watch you be you. I'm going to love you being you. And he talks about, the boundary in there, and I think that's the hardest part for me is like, he says we don't let anybody disrespect us, though. He says that in this book, we don't let anybody not treat us right. And I think that's the hardest thing for me, is holding that unconditional love, that space, and also creating enough space for me where I can love me and you simultaneously, and like really allowing for that space to be there, knowing what that space is. um that's 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 a struggle. So it's interesting. We should come back in a few years, John. Like, how are we doing? Because this is he says that this is the top, like the height of the Toltec teachings, is this right here, is being able to do this.
I
So
think it all
maybe,
goes back to, he says essentially when you're born, you're perfect. Like or maybe he doesn't use that word because he doesn't like perfect, but the words escape me. But you were fine the way you were. Like, and it was funny. I see so many people that I work with, their journey, most of our journeys are, and that's why I asked that kid question, is like we go through life looking for on the outside things that are going to make us feel full, fulfilled, and whatnot. And by the time we get to that sense of peace, of fulfillment, of comfort, it's because we've come back around, realized what we had, and that fulfillment comes from sharing who we are. And I mean, that's just another piece we didn't even touch on it in terms of this. The book was just how he says, you were right. You were the truth when you were born. And that's what we have to get back to. So again, it's tricky
Well,
because we live in the reality of this society, of this world that we're living in 2024. But I do see myself veering into living these as much as I can.
me too. And it's been such a joy sharing some of that journey with you and talking through some of these on both our podcasts here. Uh,
Yeah. And yeah,
hopefully,
we'll touch
we didn't go
base.
too long for our
We'll touch
listeners.
base. No, 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 no. Hey, I mean, the way I see it, it was a great conversation. This day and age in technology, you can like bookmark everything. I think I'd rather get a full conversation with you and pick your brain and just learn about what you've taken away from this book. So thank you for sitting down with me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and experiences with it too.
Both ways. Before we go though, what are you up to these days? Is there anything that you want to share with people who are watching and listening? Anything you have going on? Any new programming? Whatever it may be, the floor is yours.
Uh, Thank you for that. Um, I don't know. You can visit my website, carnelianconnection.com. If you're a woman in business, I'd love to just have a conversation about, being a woman in business. I have a lot of those. And if you're anybody in business who's interested in learning more about making stress reduction very specific, um, for your team or for yourself, or finding your authentic voice, I'm happy to have a conversation about that. Um, I just won an award, so there will be an event for that soon. That should be fun.
What's
um,
the award?
it's 40 under 40. So it's like one of the most influential business leaders in the county, which is
Awesome.
really nice to be recognized among your peers, but that'll
Absolutely.
be a great event for people to join in. That's in June. Um, but overall, it's just, I hope you'll read the book and enjoy the process of finding yourself.
Absolutely. And again, the book Christina and I covered was The Fifth Agreement, A Practical Guide to Self Mastery by Don Miguel Ruiz. In this version, he co wrote it with his son, Don Jose Ruiz, and Janet Mills. Um, and again, I can't stress enough how great this book is. People will take different things away from it based on where they are in their lives, the programming they've had, the stories that they've had going on in their lives. Um, I highly recommend people read it because even if it doesn't speak in a language that you understand or things don't sound right, there's certain things that he says, certain language he uses that where things will resonate. So I'm grateful. I think Christina, you had suggested that we read this one or cover this one in the first episode, in episode 2. So I'm glad you brought this book to my attention and this one, The Fifth Agreement. So again, I appreciate you so much for being in episode 2 and this the 100th episode.
Wow. Yay. Congratulations to you. 100 episodes.
Yeah, it's insane, but it's been amazing. It's been an amazing trip. Just how many people I've talked to, what I've learned, even before accolades from my friends and colleagues and network about the series, just what I've taken in. So it's been an amazing journey. And if there's anything that I might have missed with Christina, I think we're close to 2 hours now. There's so much to cover. I swear on this book, we could have kept going. But if there's anything that I might have missed, let me know. I'll reach out to her, see what kind of insights, knowledge, guidance, anything at all she can provide. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.